Hello folks. Well, look at the horses are going crazy outside. It's been belting it down with rain all night. Oh dear, last night the van was rocking around everywhere. It was pelting it down. I actually went out earlier on today to do the questions and it's just too wet. I just couldn't do it. I was wiping the lens every other half a minute, so I've had to sort of come in and do it in here. So here we are, we're in the van. There's something really nice, by the way, about a van when it's like this. Listen to that. I love it. I love it. It's therapeutic. Anyway, we're going to get on with the questions. And we're coming to the end of this now, and it's been, I don't know what it's been like for you. For me personally, I feel like I've learnt a lot, and I feel like I can understand, particularly Generation Z and Generation Alpha. I feel like I can understand and empathise with them much more than I did before. And I hope that's the same with you. I hope that's not just with me. But anyway, we're going to jump straight into this. We're coming to the end. So Generation Alpha is the last generation we're going to be looking at. Next Sunday will be the last study on this. And next Sunday we're going to be looking at how all of these generations coexist together on the earth. You've got the baby boomers, you've got Generation X, you've got the millennials, you've got Generation Z, and you've got Generation Alpha. All of these generations are coexisting and living together. We might all have a slightly different take on what's going on, but we're living together, and so the last message is going to be primarily about that. So this is the last time we're going to look at a specific generation. And I want to just say at the outset of this that I feel I want to be realistic about the future and what the Bible says about the future. I think it's really important that we're realistic with people. But I also believe that there's reason to believe that we can be optimistic also about the future. It's not all pessimism. Just because we can be real about the future, it doesn't mean that there's not something to look forward to. I really believe there is. But we're going to kick off and get real with the state that we find ourselves in right now. We can't escape this age that we're in. So I want you to first of all read 2 Thessalonians 2, 1-4. You know the passage very well. But also 1 Timothy 3, 1-12. Is it 1-12? 1 Timothy 3, 1-12. So the first question, really just to open things up for discussion, is try and think back to when we looked at Generation Z. Remember we showed the videos last week of the girl that was saying, "You will call me this," and "if you don't call me," and all that kind of stuff. You look at this whole kind of LGBTQ, this non-binary stuff, and then even this generation that's coming now, where even in our own church somebody knows somebody who wants to be identified as a cat, and the parents have asked for cat litter to be in the school and so on. So the first discussion point, just to open things up, is very simply this: how on earth have we arrived at this point in history? How on earth have we arrived at this point in history, considering all the tech that we have, considering all the scientific advancements that we have made? How on earth have we arrived at this point in history where we can almost see in Isaiah 5 where it says, "Woe to those who call evil good and good evil"? It's beginning to happen in this day. How have we even arrived at this point? That's the first question, first discussion point. Okay. Again, we're going to begin by being realistic. Okay. So, second discussion point. Can you explain how things multiply exponentially? It might be that you can't. It might be that there's somebody else in the group that can. If you remember at the start of COVID, this van is rocking. If you remember at the start of COVID, the government tried to explain to the public what exponential growth is, because they were trying to explain to us how quickly COVID-19 can spread. So I think that's the first time a lot of people even heard about that phrase. So can you explain how things multiply exponentially and what makes it so different? Okay. And then the question is this, and it sounds pessimistic, but I think it is actually being realistic. Are we headed for an exponential falling away in the church? Are we headed for an exponential falling away in the church? Okay. Point 3 then, question 3. Now I feel a bit, not guilty. I know that some of the things we looked at on Sunday morning were on the edge in terms of getting a bit sciencey, but there's something about quantum computers that we sort of need to understand, because it kind of reflects the age in which we're in. And so the third point is this: can you remember on Sunday morning, or in your own words, it doesn't have to be from Sunday morning, in your own words, can you describe the difference between a classical computer, i.e. a mobile phone or a laptop or desktop, a classical computer and a quantum computer? What's the big difference between the two? Okay. Actually, while we do that, let's just go through this list again together. Let's go through this list again, just to get a kind of a feel of what we were looking at. It's a very loose list, and I'm not saying for 1 minute that these things are all going to happen. This is all based on, you know, whether we have a crash, whether we have earthquakes, famines, pestilence, pandemics, wars. There's all kinds of things that can stop this progress, but this is kind of like what they believe is what's forecast for the next 20 years. So we talked about, well, I won't mention the chessboard. So from iPhones to Apple Watches, which we've got, to body implants, which we've already got, the Hadron Collider, which is already very much underway and doing its thing. We've got the Internet of Everything, which is certainly going to come. We've got smart toilets and smart fridges. I explained those on Sunday, how these toilets will actually get in touch with the NHS and tell them you need to come in for a thorough checkup, because, you know, incredible things, amazing. Self-driving cars, planes, trains, Elon Musk's Hyperloop, nanotechnology in the brain, transferable memory, the metaverse, which is going to have to really sort itself out, because at the moment it's lost $13.7 billion. The brain net, no more remote controls, films and games becoming full sensory, biotech, gene editing, digital schools, population will explode to about 9.7 billion, renewable energy, AI will at some point surpass the power of the human brain, quantum entanglement, which may even lead to some form of teleportation. There's going to come a point where quantum computers and AI join forces. You're certainly going to see centralised banking, you're going to see a centralised government, you're going to see a centralised world religion, and you're going to see something like we've got in China with the social credit system. There's going to come a point, they say, this is not, I don't get, this is not from Christian sites that are desperate to push some end time agenda. This is what they say. They say that there's coming a singularity, and in that singularity we may even be able to cheat death itself. Okay, with all that in mind, explain the difference between a classical computer and a quantum computer. And then secondly, point 4, we talked about superposition in quantum computers. Superposition. I just want to, this is the thing I want to know whether you've got, whether you've grasped this or not. Oh, I tell you, I was looking at every single set of eyes on Sunday morning, like looking at everybody trying to figure out whether they got this or not. My feeling was that most people had. So I'd love to know whether you had got it or not. So what is superposition in the sense of quantum mechanics, in the sense of quantum computers? What is superposition? How does this relate to the times that we're living in, and even the church? And please reference in your meeting Revelation 3:15. That's really important that you reference that as we look at superposition. So if you remember, we were looking at Genesis 1, where it says, and God made them male and female. Male and female. And then we looked at how they call themselves non-binary. So what is superposition? And how does superposition reflect the times that we're living in, these generations that are coming through, and even the state of the church in Revelation 3:15? Okay then, point five. I've just done a list of some tech. There's loads more things. Now, I know people in the groups that will know what these other things are, but can you list any future tech that is forecast to be made in the next 20 years? But here's the thing. What are the advantages and the disadvantages of the tech that you list? What are the advantages and the because there are advantages and disadvantages. I had the absolute privilege of growing up with one of our family members being at the absolute cutting edge forefront of the microchip race. And so I saw lots and lots of advantages of what the microchip could bring to society. I saw all those things firsthand. And it's not all doom and gloom. There are advantages too, okay? Okay, let's move on. Now so we need to be realistic, and the first part of this is to be realistic. Is it realistic to say that there could be an exponential falling away in the days to come? Now I want to swap now and be optimistic, because you can be realistic and still be optimistic about the future. So have a read of Isaiah 42, 3-9, Joel 2, 12 to 14, Isaiah 59, I think it's 14 to 21. No, sorry, I think it's Isaiah 59. Let me just look this up. Sorry, guys, let me look this up. Isaiah 59. Isaiah 59. Is it 19 to 21? Yeah. Isaiah 59, 19 to 21. Acts chapter 1, 6 to 8. And Matthew 28, 18 to 20. Matthew 28, 18 to 20. Okay. Even in the world today, there are two kinds of mindsets about what's coming. There are people that feel like that there's no direction. There's a definite sense of hopelessness, and there is also a sense of despair. There's no doubt about that. We looked at it, in fact, we looked at it Sunday night when we looked at the Social Dilemma film, that when social platforms reached the point where they became really useful, the correlation with suicide and self-harm went through the roof. So there is no doubt that there is a sense in the world today of a lack of direction, of hopelessness, and even despair. But there are also people today that are full of vision, they're hardworking, they're not afraid to fail, and they never give up. They never give up. And I think there is a danger, even for Christians, that know what Jesus has done for them and know the price that he's paid for them, and even know that they're going to heaven. There's a danger that we can fall into that mentality of having no direction, of feeling hopeless, and even being in despair, instead of having a vision, being hard-working, being not afraid to fail, and having that mentality of never giving up. You know, it says in Proverbs, 7 times a righteous man will fall, but he gets up again. I love it. When I see people go down, they might fail, they might make mistakes, they might say things they regret saying, but you see them get back up again. That is a great sign. When you see people that they're down for whatever reason, but they get back up again, that is a great sign. Now, all the way through these studies that we've been doing, particularly as we've been looking at the advent of computers from the 1950s all the way through to now, it's a mistake to think, and I know people that think this way, it's a mistake to think, oh, technology's moving on and it just gets more sophisticated all the time, and they almost take it for granted that these things happen. But these things don't just happen. They happen because there's a certain kind of person with a certain kind of mindset. And their mindset is they've got direction, they're hardworking, they're not afraid to fail, and if they do fail, they get back up again and they do not give up. There's people in the world like that, but as Christians, we should be even more so like that. I want to tell you about two things I seen in my dad's brother. I love my dad's brother. When he was in Hong Kong and he was running a company in Hong Kong and they were making all these gadgets and stuff, I bought him a leather-bound Bible. And I said, and it cost me quite a bit of money. And I give it to him and I said, Uncle Les, I want you to read it when you're on your planes, when you're going from one place to another. Please read the Bible. And he did read the Bible. And I've explained to you before that he has a very high view of Israel. He believes that one of the greatest evidences that there is a God is the existence of Israel. And I've asked him many times, have you read that Bible, Uncle Les? Yes, he says, I have read it. I've read it a few times. I've opened it up on a plane and I've read it. But he spent an awful lot of time in Hong Kong. He spent a lot of time in places where there's Buddhism. And he says, I really struggle to accept that Christianity is right, and in his view, and the rest of the world is wrong. That's the problem that he has with it, you see. And these are some of the things that we have to be ready to answer people. We have to be ready. But there are people in this world, that the decent people by the world standards, I'm not talking about God here, I'm talking about by the world standards. There are reasonable people that you can reason with. My Uncle Les is a typical example of somebody that you can reason with, that has a great attitude towards life. You know, when I was a kid, we used to swap things all the time. And I ended up through a series of swaps, which I could go on about all day, but through a series of swaps, I ended up with this massive engine go-kart that had a Villiers 350 engine in it, and it looked amazing, but it didn't go. And I swapped one thing that didn't go. It was a BSA Bantam scrambler bike, for another thing that didn't go, a Villiers 350 engine go-kart. It looked amazing. I remember taking it back and showing it to my dad, and my dad's like, it looks amazing, but, you know. And it ended up just being covered in a piece of tarpaulin, and I think I had it for about 2 years, and the rain, it snowed on it and everything, and put these pieces of wood all around the tarpaulin to stop the wind from blowing it. People had come round, my mates had come round, and I'd show them this engine go-kart, and they'd say, oh, you know, I'd say, well, it doesn't work, like, but it was cool to have, even though it didn't work. But this is what I want to tell you. This is about mindset, right? This is about mindset. I can remember once my Uncle Les coming to see us, and I told him about this engine go-kart. I said, Uncle Les, I've got an engine go-kart. Oh, come on, then let's have a look at it. This is what he was like, come on. So I pulled the tarpaulin back, and he's like, oh, he's crouching down, and I can hear him talking about things. I said, oh, I see. Do you know that the points are exposed? Do you know that the points are exposed? I didn't even know what points were. And he said, go and get me this tool out of the workshop. So I'm going to the workshop, getting him a pair of pliers and a screwdriver and all that, and he's taking out the points. I didn't even know what points were. He's taking out these points, and he's really always enthusiastic. Now, so much of life is about our mindset. Everybody else had looked at this go-kart and thought, it looks great, but it doesn't work. You know, he comes along and thinks, well, it looks great and I can make it work. That's the difference. So he goes off into the garage. He's in there for about an hour, 2 hours. It felt to me like that film Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, when the father goes into the garage and he puts this contraption together and he comes out, you know. So I can remember, I was waiting outside on the garden thinking, what if it works? What if he gets this go-kart working? Anyway, he comes out with these shiny points that he filed and got all ready and everything, and he puts them in. He goes, come on, Tim. And we had a long drive at the time that had a slight bank on it. So we got it to the top of the drive. He got in the driving seat. He says, right, push it as hard as you can. So I'm pushing my Uncle Les down the drive, and he slams it into second gear, and plumes of blue smoke come bellowing out of the back of it. It springs into life. And it's revving like way too high, but he even sorted that out. And then all of a sudden, like, everybody's piling out of the house, can't believe that this engine go-kart is actually going. So it went from being worthless, to worth a lot of money. And then we're all taking a times driving this go-kart. Folks, it was so powerful, you could drive it up the drive onto the garden. If you put your foot down on the garden, it just went whoom. It spun around because it had that much power. I couldn't believe it. I just thought, my Uncle Les is my hero. And I've grown up knowing this man that doesn't know when he's beat. Honestly, all the way through my life, I've seen my Uncle Les. So my dad will have a problem with his car or washing up machine or this thing or that thing, and he'll say, Les, what's up with this? Oh, let me have a look, Johnny. Calls him Johnny. Calls my dad Johnny. Let's have a look, Johnny. And within like 2 hours, whatever the thing is, it's fixed. The man's outlook is outstanding. And I can remember once, my dad was toying with the idea of buying a sailing boat for us, only a little sailing boat. And he said, I want you to come and have a look at this sailing boat I'm thinking of buying. It was dirt cheap sailing boat. He said it wasn't that cheap. But anyway, my dad's pretty tight with money, so it probably was. Anyway, we all went to see this sailing boat. And this sailing boat, if it was around today, you would think that the people that owned it were like LGBTQ, because the entire boat was painted like a rainbow. And as kids, we were like, Dad, buy it, Dad, buy the boat. And we were all looking at it thinking, this is so ace. And the idea was we were going to sail it on Rudyard Lake. So my dad buys this boat, tows it back to the house. Few days later, Uncle Les comes to visit. What's this you've got, Johnny? Oh, I bought this boat, Les. Anyway, I don't know what happened, but my dad went out to do something. I don't know what he went out to do, but he came back and my Uncle Les is in the boat, but his legs are coming out of the bottom of it. So my dad's looking at him. My Uncle Les is clearly in the boat, but his legs are coming out of the bottom of it. The boat's on like one of those trailers and his legs are coming out of it. And all he can hear is bang, 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 bang. And my dad comes to my Uncle Les and says, what's going on? And he says, oh, Johnny, it's full of dry rot. The entire bottom of the boat was utterly full of dry rot. Don't worry, Johnny, come on in, grab a hammer. And they're smashing this boat up that he's just bought. And over the next 2 days, I can remember as a kid watching my dad and my Uncle Les smash all this dry rot out and then start to rebuild it. And it was never a case of, oh, look at this boat. Was an absolutely hopeless situation. Oh, there's no future for this boat. We've been ripped off. Hey, they've done this one. It was totally different. It was, come on, Johnny, let's get going. And that's how it was. That is how he was. And I've always looked up to him as like my hero in the world because of his outlook. And if only Christians would have this outlook. You can be realistic. The engine go-kart didn't work. It was worthless. The boat would have sank if we'd have taken that boat to Rudyard Lake. It would have sank to the bottom of the lake. It was full of rot. You can be realistic and yet still be optimistic. Later on, when I got born again, I wanted to know my Uncle Les's life story, because he's even got one of his inventions on Columbo. You know Columbo, the inspector?
And we attached the
he solves one of the cases with the record player that my Uncle Les designed, which had a remote control way back in the early 70s, a sonic remote control that could play an individual track. He had inventions on the Big Bang Theory and also Tomorrow's World. What is it that makes these people? How are they? They are different, folks. And it isn't because they're intelligent. The teachers told my grandma that her son, my Uncle Les, was dyslexic and that there was no hope for him. That's what they told him. He's a waste of time, that one. That's what they told my grandma and granddad. In the late 60s, my Uncle Les got into electronics. He'd started making radios in his bedroom. Then he gets married to my Auntie Phyllis. Then they get a job in Silicon Valley, California. He's warned that if he goes over to Silicon Valley, he might get conscripted into the Vietnam War, but he goes anyway because he wants to follow his dreams. So he goes to Silicon Valley. The Vietnam War really kicks off, and he ends up almost getting conscripted. So he crosses the border into Canada in a Volkswagen Beetle with 2 bikes on the back and as much stuff as they could load in. And they just went into Canada. He found a place to worked there for a bit, and got a phone call to go to Glasgow in Scotland and work on a microprocessor. So he leaves Canada, goes over to Glenrothes in Scotland, then gets another call from Silicon Valley asking him to come back with much bigger money and all sorts of things. And one of his partners said to him, and I talked to my Uncle Les about this the other day. He says, I'm sure he was thinking on his feet because he didn't want us to go back to Silicon Valley. He says, Les, why don't you stay and why don't we design the first single chip processor? So my Uncle Les turned down more money to be a part of something to design a single chip processor. Now get this, folks, this will blow your head off. This is the late 60s, early 70s, right? They were given 4 council houses in Glenrothes, Scotland, to work on this single chip processor. They had a small team. There was 4 main people in the team. These weren't council houses to live in. These were council houses to build a silicon microchip in council houses. On top of that, at that time, there was only electricity 3 days a week. The rest of the time, they were working off gas lamps. These things had never been made before. A single chip processor for a calculator, never been done before. The race was on. Intel and Silicon Valley were racing at it. Texas Instruments were racing at it. And my Uncle Les's little team, Pico in Glenrothes, were racing at it. They actually got the patent, the first patent. So I asked him as a born-again believer now, Uncle Les, what was it like? What was it like for you? He says, well, and he never sees the negative. So although they only had the electricity 3 days a week, and the rest of the time they're working on the gas light, and they're working in council houses, and to produce microchips, you have to be in the most sterile environments. It's insane how sterile the environment has to be. If you see these factories where they make chips, they are suited from head to toe with masks, everything. They're making them in council houses. And each council house was allocated a certain job. So Uncle Les's house, his job was to make a schematic of the microchip 500 times the size of the actual chip. That was his job. So he made this great big schematic up and put these transistors here, there, and or NOT gates and all this kind of stuff, puts it all together. Then he takes it to the next council house. Their job is to do what you call a lithography. They shrink down this thing that's 500 times the size of a microchip to 10 times the size. Then They take it to the next council house. Their job is to take a picture of this chip that's 10 times the size, an inverse picture, and beam it down onto a piece of silicon. And this piece of silicon will have about 70 chips projected onto it. You literally take a picture and it's imprinted onto the silicon, burned onto the silicon. They try day and night, day and night, day and night, doing this in council houses, in environments where there's dust everywhere. And because at that time, one of the processes, the final process, they had a piece of glass over the silicon where they took the picture and scaled it down from 10 times the size to going on the chip. He said one of the problems was the glass was touching the silicon. So most of the chips were ruined because there was tiny microparticles of glass on the silicon. So I said to him, what did it feel like, Uncle Les, when you finally got a microprocessor working? He said, oh, it was a good feeling. He said, but there were problems. So he said, my job was then to get this very powerful microscope, and to put it up with this great big light on. And he said, I had this little pinhead on this arm. And he said, the trouble was the pinhead was that big in comparison to the transistors that it was covering almost 4 transistors. But his job was to prod the chip in various places and to find out the part that didn't work. Well, anyway, eventually they get this thing working. They get the first microchip working. How do you do that when everything is stacked against you, in an environment with dust particles everywhere, when you've only got electricity 3 days in a 7-day week, when you're working under gaslight, when your budget is so small? How do you overcome all these obstacles? It's in your mind. You can be realistic and still be optimistic. And I believe this is one of the things that the church has got to grasp in these last days. Yes, we've got to be realistic. And realistically, we could see an exponential falling away. We could. But we've also got to be optimistic. And I believe there's 2 kinds of people, even in the church. There are those that have no direction. They're full of hopelessness and despair. And there are those that have a vision from God. They're hardworking, they're not afraid to fail, and they don't know when to quit. They never give up. Which one are we? Which one are we? Are we those people that say there's no hope? And there's no hope for these generations. Realistically, you look, the odds are stacked against the church today. They are. That's being realistic. But also there is reason. There's reason to be optimistic about the future. If God is for us, who can be against us? Now, when I say optimistic, I'm not talking about a worldwide revival. I am of the belief that most of the harvest has gone in the last 2,000 years. Most of it has gone in. But I believe, and I love the fact that Richard and Leanne have called their baby Ruth, because I believe that we can still glean around the edges of the field. And I am optimistic that even in this time of despair, Naomi saying, don't call me that, I'm full of bitterness, life's gone wrong for me. Ruth happened upon a field. She happened upon Boaz. And she's gleaning around the edges of the field. And she comes away with a micro harvest. Why can't we believe that for this generation? What's wrong with us? Come on, church. Going through these studies for me personally, has made me rethink The way I look at Generation Z and Generation Alpha, Ruth's generation, we've got to be praying for them. There's always going to be Shadrach, Meshach and Abednego. There's always going to be Daniels. There's always going to be Moses. There's always going to be people like David that serve the purposes of God in his generation. If people can be optimistic about scientific advancements in computers and not be put off by the great hurdles that lie in front of them, for instance, in the quantum computer world, Jordan was telling me the other day, in quantum computers, at the moment, they can only switch them on for fractions of seconds because they heat up too quickly. They have mountains to climb, but they'll overcome them. Why can't the church be both realistic and optimistic about the future? About the future. Which one are you? Which one are you? I believe that in the church today, I'm talking about a mental attitude here. There are people that have lost direction. They feel hopeless inside. They're even despairing. There are also people that are realistic. They see what's wrong, but they have vision. They are hard working. They're not afraid to fail, and they will not give up. 7 times a righteous man will fall, but he gets back up again. Oh Lord, that felt more like a preach than a time of questions. I can feel the peace of God, friends. I can feel the peace of God. He loves us. He loves us. If he can love me, he can love you. There's no two ways about that. Amen. Amen.
Hey, the X10s are online.
Gentlemen, I am now about to send a signal from this laptop through our local ISP, racing down fiber optic cable at the speed of light to San Francisco, bouncing off a satellite in geosynchronous orbit to Lisbon, Portugal, where the data packets will be handed off to submerged transatlantic cables terminating in Halifax, Nova Scotia, and transferred across the continent via microwave relays back to our ISP and the X10 receiver attached to this lamp. Look at me, I've got goosebumps. Are we ready on the stereo?
Go for stereo.